So here's the result. Viktor Orban, Donald Trump's single most useful operator inside the European Union, is finished. 16 years in power, gone. And Trump just lost the one European leader who was genuinely working his interests from inside the bloc.
And just days before Hungary made that call, Mark Carney was standing at the Liberal Convention here in Canada, laying out the same argument from his historic Davos speech that started the entire movement. But this time he was speaking to Canadians. It wasn't a global forum, it was a domestic moment, and the message was clear. The old system is breaking, and Canada is not waiting around for it to fix itself.
Yep, he just said it right out loud and said it plainly. The world's not changing gradually anymore, it's changing suddenly. And if Canada stands still, we don't preserve our future, we lose it.
These two stories aren't parallel. They're the same story, and Canada is at the center of it. So stay with us, because by the end of this, you'll see exactly why.
So let's be precise about what Orban represented. Not just a prime minister, he was the operating model that the authoritarian right pointed to as proof. Proof that you could systematically hollow out courts, restructure the media landscape, rewrite electoral rules, redirect state resources to loyalists, and still win elections. Repeatedly, over 16 years.
The international right held him up as the demonstration project. If Orban could do it in Hungary and keep winning, the argument was that the model was durable, that voters, once acclimated to that kind of politics, well, they don't reverse course.
Well, Hungary just reversed that course.
Péter Magyar's campaign didn't run as the ideological opposite of Orban. He didn't show up with a counter manifesto. He showed up with a specific indictment. Documented corruption, a healthcare system people can feel failing, institutions that stop serving the public. That was the pitch. Hey, this is broken, and we can fix it.
No manufactured enemy, no cultural performance, just a direct address to what people are actually living with. And Hungary voted for the candidate who said that.
Now this matters far beyond Budapest. The foundational assumption of the strongman model is that fear and resentment, once embedded, becomes permanent. That once a population learns to vote on grievance, well, they don't unlearn it. Well, Hungary just disproved that assumption.
And for Trump, this is not a symbolic loss. Orban was operational for him. He was the voice inside the European Union that slowed aid packages, softened sanctions language, maintained the relationship with Moscow from a seat at the EU table. Now, that voice is gone.
Sound familiar? Because Mark Carney ran the same play here. Different scale, different country, but the same fundamental offer. Direction instead of performance.
Yeah, Poilievre had his window. He was polling at historic numbers. The anger brand was moving. And then Carney walked in with something that Poilievre's entire campaign couldn't produce and still can't, a plan.
And then Carney went to Davos, the room where the global economic architecture gets discussed. And he said it as clearly as anyone. Canada is building a resilient economy. Canada is locking in reliable partners. Canada is not pausing for Washington to stabilize.
And that's not a campaign promise. That is a position. And voters here in Canada recognize the difference between a position and a performance, luckily.
Poilievre's coalition is cracking big time. MPs have crossed the floor. The Liberals are inside striking distance of a majority, and the wave that was supposed to sweep the Conservatives to power has lost its charge.
Because the fear that powered that wave needed to stay at a certain temperature. And that temperature is continuing to drop.
Now let's take this back to Brussels, because what changes in Hungary doesn't stay in Hungary. Not when Hungary holds a seat at the EU table.
Yeah, for years, Orban was the single most disruptive actor inside the European Union on questions that matter the most right now. Every time the bloc moved to strengthen Ukraine aid, tighten Russian energy sanctions, or coordinate a unified security response, Orban found the lever.
He didn't need a majority vote to block either. EU decisions on certain critical matters require a unanimous vote. Orban understood that architecture and he used it. deliberately. He was Moscow's most effective institutional tool in Western Europe. Not through military action, but through procedural disruption.
And that veto player, it's now gone. Péter Magyar's Hungary is expected to end 16 years of obstruction from inside the EU. The bloc moves faster, aid flows without a spoiler in the room, Ukraine gets breathing room it has not had since the invasion began.
And all this connects directly to Canada's positioning. Carney's foreign policy runs on a specific premise. Canada needs reliable partners, not just familiar ones. A fractured EU with a Moscow-aligned operator at the table is fundamentally less reliable. A unified EU operating as a coherent bloc, which will happen now, is a different conversation entirely.
Yeah, and Carney is already in that conversation. He was building toward it before Orban fell. Now, the architecture actually supports it.
So here's the larger frame here. The model that Orban represented requires the crisis to stay permanent, because the crisis is the source of the mandate. As long as there is a credible enemy, Brussels, immigrants, Soros, the deep state, whoever, the grievance sustains the coalition.
But a platform built on permanent crisis has a structural failure mode. It can't resolve anything. Resolution would eliminate that actual grievance. And the grievance is the product.
Voters in multiple countries are starting to do that accounting. The enemies keep rotating. The scoreboard never moves. The promise of outcomes, well, they never materialize. And at a certain point, the pitch stops working. And people are starting to see that, and countries are starting to vote that way.
Carney in Canada, Magyar now in Hungary. These are not the same politician. They're not running the same campaign at all, but they share a core attribute. They are running on the idea that government should function, not perform.
And the right-wing alternative across these countries is running against that premise. The argument is that the system is so corrupt, so captured, that only disruption can fix it. But disruption without a plan, well, it's just more damage.
And the aura of inevitability around that model is fracturing. And it's fracturing simultaneously in multiple countries. And that's a pattern. And patterns in democratic politics are worth paying close attention to.
And Canada's position in all of this is not accidental. Carney read the reorganization early and made that call. Canada would be a deliberate player in the new architecture, not a country that waits to be arranged around someone else's strategy, but the leader, the one who took the first step.
Yeah, it's about being proactive. And the pivot that he did is already operational. The export numbers are real. The direct bilateral relationships with European partners, relationships that previously ran through the US, are now being built and formalized, while others are still deciding whether the shift is permanent. We're ahead of the curve here.
And the international reaction to Carney's positioning has been substantial. Canada is being treated as a serious partner at the moment when the democratic world has a huge shortage of them.
You can say that again.
And that position is becoming stronger as Europe unites. A unified EU carries more economic weight in trade negotiations. It has more credibility on shared security commitments. There's more capacity to be the reliable partner that Canada's foreign policy is specifically designed around.
Orban's departure accelerates that unity, which is why his fall and Carney's rise aren't just parallel stories. They're interconnected developments pointing in the exact same direction.
Carney has been precise about the language he uses on strength right from the beginning. He doesn't frame it as dominance or leverage. He frames it as readiness, institutional depth, the capacity to sustain commitments over time.
And that is a direct contrast to what the Strongman model offers, which is strength as the ability to make others comply through pressure, through unpredictability, through the credible threat of damage.
So what this week showed is that the market for that version of strength is contracting.
So where does this leave us? Well, Orban is gone. Trump loses the one European leader who was actively advancing his interests inside the EU. Canada proved that the alternative is viable, and delivered that proof before anyone else. And Europe now has a cleaner path to decisive action on everything Orban was blocking.
And things are looking up for Ukraine and not so good for Putin anymore. So that's all the convergence. And Canada positioned itself at the center of it before the outcome was certain. That's the strategic win. We led the way and countries are following.
The question now is whether all this holds, whether the EU converts Orban's absence into actual policy momentum, whether Carney's coalition stays coherent as Washington's pressure continues. Let us know in the comments because we want to know which direction you think this goes.
And stay with us because we put out videos every single day and we want to hear from you because we're always learning the most from this community right here.
And if you want to support this channel, check the pinned comment down below. It's got links to our merch store, the behind the scenes A-team that you can join, as well as our Substack and private Facebook group.
So let's keep an eye out for those by-elections that are happening today, and we will see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.